Alright guys, Abel here, back with another video, and in today's video we are gonna be talking about sleep on popular demand, how to take steps to get better sleep on a regular basis, how to work around sleep issues if you have some. Now the first thing I want to say is that I for a long time have had a beef with the industry when it comes to communicating about the topic of sleep. I would say that the industry when it comes to the topic of sleep, I wouldn't want to say they act idiotically, but they are just a bit ignorant in their approach when they are communicating to the masses about the topic of sleep and the importance of sleep. Because anytime I'm opening a video or an article which talks about sleep, I would say 80% of it is dedicated to talking about the horrible consequences of not getting enough sleep on a regular basis, what's going to happen with your muscle gain and fat loss ambitions, and how critically important it is to get good sleep. And my issue with all of that is not that those things are not true, it's that simply fear-mongering and warning people about the bad consequences of not getting good sleep on a regular basis is only going to be beneficial to a very limited extent. In fact, I would say in good part that's actually going to be flat out counterproductive if you want to sleep better. Because here's the thing, there are things in life which you have to actively do to make them better. For example, going to the gym and training hard is something you actively do. Eating healthfully is something you actively do. So if you go to the gym and you're worried that you might not be training hard enough because you read some Facebook post about that from someone, that might actually help you because you can just decide to push yourself harder in the gym. If you go to the grocery store and you're worried that you might not be eating healthy enough, that might actually help you because you can just buy healthier stuff in the grocery store. Now, sleep, on the other hand, is a passively occurring biological process. You cannot actively push yourself harder to sleep. If you lie in bed tired and you just completely let go of everything and you just let yourself to fall asleep, you're gonna fall asleep. If, on the other hand, you go to bed worried that you might not be getting good enough sleep, that is not going to help you. In fact, that's going to actively make it harder to fall asleep. In fact, there is a Hungarian phrase for this. I wouldn't exactly know how to translate it to English, but it would be something like sleep strain. And it refers to this very phenomenon whereby people are so worried that they might not be able to fall asleep. They are concentrating so much on, okay, when am I going to fall asleep? When am I going to fall asleep? That they cannot sleep. Now, of course, there are people for whom some fear-mongering about the bad consequences of not getting enough sleep is gonna be beneficial, because the only reason they are not getting good sleep is because they are just too busy watching Netflix until 4 a.m. in the morning. But for a lot of other people, especially in the fitness industry where neurotic, overly anxious, and over-analyzing people are overly abundant to begin with, too much fear-mongering about all of this is not going to be beneficial. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this video about the problem. In fact, I'm not going to spend any time on the problem because I'm assuming that just like most of us, you have had a couple of nights in your life when you've had 1 to 3 hours less sleep than you would have needed, and you know how you felt. If you're like most of us, it probably wasn't that great. And if you're wondering whether for the sake of your muscle gain and fat loss ambitions, it is a good idea to fix your sleep and do something about all of that, yeah, it is a good idea. Now, before we get into the concrete strategies and steps you can take to get better sleep, one thing that I think is good to acknowledge is that there is a considerable genetic variation in how easy it is for people to get good sleep. I don't have hard data on this, but I would hypothesize that the variability in how easy it is for people to get good sleep is comparable to how easy it is for people to gain muscle. To give you a couple of examples on this, if I'm doing all the strategies that are going to be laid out in this video, so I do everything right basically, then I may be able to count on good quality and enough sleep almost every day on a regular basis. But even then, I will have the odd night where, for no apparent reason, I'm just gonna get shitty sleep. If I'm nailing down the big rocks, so I'm kind of 80-20ing this whole thing, so I'm doing the biggest things that are gonna help and I'm not gonna mess with the minutia, then my sleep is probably gonna be on and off. I will have some nights where I'm getting good sleep and then a couple of other nights where it's shitty, so maybe 4 or 5 days of the week I'm gonna get good sleep, and then 2-3 nights a week is just gonna be off. And if I'm really messing everything up, then basically the sky's the limit in how shitty my sleep can get. I mean, I may get 5-6 hours of sleep a night on average, and if I have a couple of nights where I'm only getting 3 hours of sleep, or maybe I have an all-nighter every once in a while, I won't be too surprised. On the other hand, take someone like my girlfriend, and I know a couple of people like this. I will just briefly take you through a typical day in her life. She might wake up at 7:30 in the morning, go to work, have a couple of cups of coffee during the day, of course, then get home around 4, have lunch, have a cup of coffee after lunch, then chill a little bit, and she might then take a nap at 5 or 6 p.m. By the way, note that she went to nap after the cup of coffee. Then she might be asleep until 8 or 9 p.m., at which point she might wake up, have a cup of coffee, then chill a bit, watch some Netflix or whatever, and then around midnight or 1 a.m., she will go to bed again, and then she will sleep another 7 hours or so. Okay, if I did just one of those things, napping late in the evening or having coffee late in the evening, I would not be asleep until 6 or 7 a.m. But she's just doing that regularly and she has no issues whatsoever getting good sleep. And by the way, before any of you comment that, well, but the caffeine is still interfering with her REM sleep and her sleep is still impaired even though she doesn't know it, just stop. I would gladly take any day of the week the kind of shitty sleep that she's getting at night after doing all those things. Okay, so on one end of the spectrum, we have someone like me. I've had sleep issues ever since I was 16 years old and possibly before. I just don't remember what happened before that. And then we have someone like my girlfriend, who is just incredibly resilient to all kinds of disruptions to her regular sleep cycle. She can sleep at any time, wherever, after or before drinking coffee, whether it's warm or cold outside. She is just kind of a sleeping freak. And probably a lot of these differences between people can be explained by actual physiological differences, like the hardware is different, and some of those are probably just explained by personality. And I will give you an example for this as well. My mother is a pretty average sleeper, I would say. She's not a sleep freak like my girlfriend. But when something really stressful happens, something really traumatic that just flips her world upside down, her go-to solution for that is, you know what, I have to sleep on this. And during those times, she will go to bed at like 4 p.m. and she might be asleep until like the next morning. She will be in bed for 12 hours and she will sleep soundly. And at that point, she will just come out of her bedroom and she will have this completely transformed look. She will have this smooth skin and clear face. And she will be like, oh, this treated me well. I think I will have now a much clearer head to reflect on the problems. Me, on the other hand, when something stressful happens to me, it doesn't have to be that traumatic. It could be just an argument I have with someone, or a stressful email that I read, or even like a football game that I watch and it ends in some dramatic fashion, not in a way that I would want it to. The first thing to go for me is my sleep. And of course, then it just makes things even worse, because not only do I have the problem that I have to deal with, but I have to do so in a sleep-deprived state. So if I was like my mother in this regard, I would be a very different person by now, I think. So I'm not saying all of this to be discouraging. I'm saying this because just because someone we know is able to get good sleep doing things a certain way, it doesn't mean that we can do the same thing. And on the other hand, just because we can't get good sleep doing things a certain way now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are doomed. It just means that we might have to be a bit more measured and intelligent with our approach to all of this. Now with that, let's get into the actual strategies that you can do to get better sleep. Now, technically, we could divide this entire discussion into two parts and talk about things that are going to help you to fall asleep specifically, and then there are things that are going to help you to stay asleep specifically. But in practice, what's going to help you with one of these is also going to help you with the other, with the exception possibly of melatonin supplements, but we are going to come back to supplements at the end of the video. For now, just know that we are going to lump all of these together, and with that, let's get into it. Now, the first kind of philosophical outlook that you want to keep in mind on all of this is that optimizing your sleep and doing things to improve your sleep quality doesn't just start an hour or 2 hours before going to bed. Literally, optimizing your sleep starts from the minute you wake up in the morning, because basically everything you do over the course of the day is going to contribute in some way, shape, or form to you getting good sleep, positively or negatively. Now, after that, the second big kind of philosophical approach that you want to have to all of this is that you want to create a really big contrast between your daytime, or the first half of your day, and your nighttime, or the second part of your day. And the bigger this contrast is, the more you're going to condition your body and your brain to be relaxed and still when the nighttime comes and it is time to prepare for bedtime. So in general, the daytime is the time to be stimulated, with stimulants or otherwise, but it is the time to be exposed to a lot of stimulating things, such as bright light, such as stimulative social interactions, such as a lot of movement and physical activity. That is the time to get your stressful errands handled and to work hard and get things done. On the other hand, the nighttime is the time to let go of most of those things and to be relaxed, peaceful, and to just generally wind down. Now, specifically, what things am I talking about? The first thing would be bright light exposure, and within that, specifically blue light exposure. Blue light is a strong signal for your body that you should be alert and awake, and it also suppresses melatonin production, which is the hormone that your body produces as you're getting ready to sleep. So obviously, this is not something that you want to have in the nighttime. However, having lots of it during the daytime is actually a good thing because it's going to help reinforcing this big contrast between your daytime and your nighttime, assuming, of course, that at your nighttime, you will not have a lot of this blue light. So a few things you can do specifically is, for one, get outside as much as possible during the daylight hours. Of course, for a lot of us, that is only possible to a limited extent because we are spending a lot of time indoors. If you have an office job, this can be tricky, but even going to the nearest balcony every hour or so and spending a few minutes outside is already going to help you to get some decent bright light exposure over the course of the day. If it's really not possible for you to be outside enough, then investing into one of these daylight mimicking lamps is also a smart solution. There are different strengths at which these lamps come. If it's one of the weaker kinds, then you might have to be exposed to its light for a couple of hours a day. If it's one of the super strong ones, then even a few minutes could cut it. And then, of course, at night, you basically want to do the opposite. First of all, at home, you don't have to have all the lights lighting at all times. You can have one or two major light sources in one or two rooms, and that might be enough to light up the entire apartment. Now, if you want to take this a step further, then you can tweak the light bulbs you have at home. You can buy what's called incandescent light bulbs, I think that's what they are called, which emit a lower spectrum of light and less of the blue light, and they have a more warmer light that they emit. You can also just buy orange or red light bulbs, which also emit a more sleep-friendly wavelength of light. You can also tweak your smartphone and laptop screens, and these are things that probably a lot of you will know, but nevertheless it's good to reiterate them. So you can install Flux or Flux on your computer, which will change the color of your screen, and it will also thus emit less blue light. So that would be for your laptop, and for your smartphone, you also have various options. I'm using an app called Twilight for my Android, which also changes the color of my screen, similar to Flux on my computer. But a lot of the newer models from the Android and Apple phones are coming with what's called light shift function, which is basically doing the same thing. And if you want to take it a step further, maybe because you don't have the opportunity to tweak your lighting conditions at home significantly, maybe because you're living with some other people, you can buy one of these blue light blocking glasses, which you can buy pretty cheaply these days. But you can also just buy any kind of sunglass which have more orange or red tinted lenses, and they will do the job generally as well. The next thing would be caffeine, and the first thing there is you want to be mindful of its half-life. Half-life basically means the amount of time for the peak concentration of caffeine in your blood to half itself, basically. Now, in the case of caffeine, it's about 5 or 6 hours, which means that you want to space out your caffeine intake from your bedtime enough. So if you have a cup of coffee at 7 p.m., which is about 100 milligrams, and then you go to bed at midnight, you might still have around 50 milligrams of caffeine in your system by the time you want to fall asleep. And on the other hand, you might do a great job at not consuming caffeine too close to bedtime, but if it's a very large amount, it might still screw you over. So you might have your last caffeine dose 10 hours before bedtime, but if it's 400 milligrams, you might still have 100 milligrams of caffeine in your system by the time you want to hit the sack. So do some math about this in your head and make sure that you're consuming an amount of caffeine at a time that is not going to mess with your sleep. Another thing to be mindful of here is that even decaf coffee is not completely caffeine free, so don't have large amounts of that before bedtime if you're sensitive to that. And even substances like chocolate and cocoa powder can screw you over. And I know this from firsthand experience because I love to have certain fitness-friendly desserts with a lot of cocoa powder on them, and I did that late at night before bed, and then it screwed with my sleep. And I think the amount of caffeine in cocoa powder is roughly 15 grams per 10 grams, if I'm not mistaken. The next thing is stress, and stress is unavoidable. It is a part of life, and some amount of it is actually even beneficial. It helps you to be more alert and awake, and it can make you more productive. But the main thing there is to time your stress. You basically want to have high amounts of stress at certain parts of the day and very low amounts of it at other times. And in general, the time to handle your stressful errands is early in the day. I'm sure you've heard us saying that you should do the hardest thing first thing in the morning, and there is a lot of truth to that, because then those things will not haunt you later in the day. So if you have some stressful emails to answer, maybe some unresolved billing issues or mortgage issues or whatever, deal with all of those things early in the day and don't leave it to later in the day. If you have something mean to say to someone, do that early in the day as well. And a more general approach to stress, and this is something I learned from Menno Henselmans' personal trainer course, is that you want to take a proactive approach to managing stress. Basically, the best way to alleviate stress from any kind of pressing issue is to try to fix the problem and actively do something about it. Don't just hope that the problem goes away, and don't just try to meditate yourself out of stress or something, because there is a good chance that it just won't happen. On the other hand, if you actively try to deal with the stress by doing something about it, there is a lot higher chance that you won't be bothered by it for as long. Movement and physical activity, in general, they have a very good track record for helping with sleep issues. So exercise in general is good. If you can do it early in the day, there might be even better, but even if you do it in the evening, that is probably still better than no exercise at all. The only thing to be mindful of here is that you don't want to have a lot of stimulants before that if it is relatively close to bedtime. Social interaction, in theory at least, it should also be better to have most of that early in the day. But of course, some chill and peaceful social interaction is fine to have anytime, but try to make them peaceful and not overly stimulative. So heated debates over the moral implications of abortion and death penalty, leave that earlier in the day. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is consistency. Okay, it is not enough to just have this big contrast between your daytime and nighttime. You also want to be consistent with the things that you're doing. And that is important to optimize your circadian rhythms. Basically, your body is equipped with a whole bunch of internal molecular clocks that are regulating how and when certain processes take place in the body. So your hunger hormones, your body temperature, the hormones that are regulating wakefulness and sleepiness, they are all operating via these internal clocks, and they operate over a roughly 24-hour cycle. And what your body is trying to do is set these clocks to operate according to a very predictable and consistent rhythm. How is that happening? There are external cues that influence how these internal clocks work. These external cues are called Zeitgebers, which comes from German. I guess you would have to pronounce them Zeitgeber, but now we're just going to say Zeitgeber for simplicity's sake. And it literally means time givers. Now these Zeitgebers, so these cues, include things like bright light, specifically blue light, food intake, movement, any compound that has a stimulative or depressant impact on the brain, such as caffeine, or on the other hand, supplements like melatonin. So basically, you can think of your circadian rhythm as the source code for a software, which contains the individual commands that are regulating how the software is working. And then these Zeitgebers are like the individual commands within the source code. So anytime you're eating a meal, you're inputting a command into the source code. Anytime you have a cup of coffee or take a stimulant, you're inputting another command into the source code. Anytime you're exposed to a ton of bright light, you're inputting a command into the source code. Now, what your body wants is to have these commands to be as consistent and predictable as possible. So staying at the software analogy, if you're always providing the same command, like incoming meal at 1 p.m., after some time, you don't even have to type in the command. The command will type itself, basically. It's like when your browser recommends you facebook.com when you press the F letter on your keyboard because you typed it in so many times before. When you start becoming random with things, so for example, with your meal times, one day you have lunch at noon, on another day at 3 p.m., and then on another day you're skipping lunch altogether, the source code is getting filled up with a whole bunch of random commands. So the whole system is starting to operate in a more frantic and unpredictable manner. So when it comes to hunger, for example, you're going to start having these random hunger pangs over the course of the day during times when you wouldn't want them to. That's when you walk down the street and all of a sudden you just become hypoglycemic and you're crazy hungry and your cognition is all screwed up. And when it comes to sleep, if one day you go to bed at midnight and then on another day at 2 a.m. and then at 10 p.m., then yeah, it might happen that you want to go to bed at midnight because the next day you have to wake up at 8 a.m. and then you're just lying there restless and you're not sleepy and you don't know what's going on. So that's why it is important to have a pretty consistent schedule. So eat your meals at the same time, wake up at the same time, even on the weekends, go to bed at the same time, try to maintain a consistent schedule and enforce a bit of a robotic, regimented schedule on yourself. Now, how stringent and strict you have to be with all of this is once again dependent on how susceptible you are to disturbances in your sleep. So if you're completely unshakable, you can probably sleep in on the weekends and you can go out to party a few days a week, and probably it's not going to be a big deal. If you're very sensitive to this, then you want to be very selective to when it's worth it for you to mess up your schedule. I mean, look at, for example, high school kids on summer holiday. I mean, they are as random as it gets with their circadian rhythm and schedule, and most of them still don't have any problems getting a lot of sleep at night. Now, does this then mean that if you're someone for whom it would be advisable to have a strict schedule, you should never make any exceptions, and you can never sleep in on the weekends, and you can never go out to party? And if your Tinder date writes to you that, hey, so I'm waiting for you at 1 a.m. at the poolside naked, then you should write back that, no, my bedtime is at 10 p.m. Look, this is a tricky thing. On the one hand, as a guy just talking into the camera, it's very easy for me to say, no, don't gamble with your health. Decide what's more important to you, your health or some shallow fun at night. But the reality is that part of living on planet Earth is that sometimes there is value in things that are not completely coinciding with your health optimization quest. So, for example, I met my girlfriend on a night out 2 years ago. I mean, hell, the first time we kissed was at probably 2 a.m. Do I now look back with regret and think that, man, I wish I adhered to my regular schedule and went to bed at 10 p.m.? Of course not. So yes, there can be value to these things, and sometimes a thing that might be great for your overall life experience might not be the best thing for your health or your circadian rhythm optimization. And I would say that the best answer I can give you on this is that the situation is akin to managing your nutrition. So in general, you want to eat healthfully, you want to eat a lot of nutrient-dense foods, and you want to be within a reasonable energy budget. But every once in a while, it might be worth it to significantly overshoot your energy budget and eat some junk. There are some social events and feasting occasions when it is absolutely worth it to do that. Now, you don't want to be completely lenient with it, right? You don't want to just say yes to any random opportunity. If someone offers you a donut at the office, you don't just want to say yes because, hey, I've been offered this. But there are times when it's worth it, and you have to learn to manage these things over time and recognize when those occasions are. So the same thing applies to going out and disrupting your circadian rhythm. In general, you want to be aware of the fact that this thing matters, and it is a good thing to have a consistent schedule, but every once in a while, it might be worth it to kick it on its head. Now, I will still have a couple of bullet point type action step lists that I will give you at the end, but first I want to talk a bit about psychological management and not just optimizing the hardware, the physiology of sleep, but also your mind. Because every once in a while, you might find yourself in a situation where you did almost everything right, you didn't have caffeine too late, you had lots of bright lights during the day and not at all at night, and still you're lying in bed completely restless, your heart is pounding, and you just cannot get to sleep. And that is because you also have to think about optimizing your mindset and your thought processes so that you're not too stressed out and you're not overthinking stuff when it is not time to do that. For example, when you want to fall asleep. So the first thing, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that you want to basically preload your stress for the early part of the day. So I, for example, don't even check my inbox in the evening. I don't check YouTube comments generally, and every once in a while I do, and I'm always regretting it because maybe I'm reading some super annoying dumb comment, which then just fucks me up and it messes with my sleep then. So that's the first thing you want to do. Secondly, and this is something that I think is very important, is that you want to practice solitude. And solitude basically in this case refers to spending time alone with your thoughts. And this is something that is especially a pressing issue in today's world where we are constantly connected. Okay, we are always on Facebook or Instagram or even just listening to a podcast. And that is an issue because during those times, as Cal Newport says it in his book, Digital Minimalism, we are processing information from other people's minds. Okay, and it is important to spend some time just alone with your thoughts. And that is a very different thing than spending time alone. Because you could be in a room with 100 people, but you could be alone with your thoughts. Or you could be alone by yourself, but you could be intaking information from other people's minds because you're connected. Because you might be on your Facebook or Instagram feed or listening to a podcast. And it is important to spend some time just with your thoughts. Because basically what your brain does, and I don't have hard data on this, this is not something that I'm citing from a research journal, but this is more so my experience. What your brain does is that it's taking the times when it's just you and your thoughts, and those are the times when you're reflecting on your problems, and your brain is trying to find solutions to those problems in a creative way. And of course, the worst time to do all of that is the time when you actually want to fall asleep. So it is important to have dedicated times during the day when you're not listening to a podcast, you're not looking at your phone, it's just you and your thoughts. One thing that I like to do is have a couple of commutes during the day when I'm not listening to anything. No music, no podcast, it's just me and my thoughts. Another thing I also like to do is to take an evening walk. And during those times, I just take a 15-20 minute walk near the neighborhood, and I am just reflecting on things calmly. And by the time I'm coming back, it's almost like I'm a different person. I was able to reflect on my problems, put them to their right place, and kind of come to terms with them and agree with myself that I'm gonna be dealing with them when the time comes, which will be the next day. Similar practices that are also effective are journaling. I think it's great to have a journaling routine, something that you're just doing every evening. For example, you could just open a Word document and type down your thoughts. You don't even have to save the document, because I think the purpose of journaling is not to read back what you wrote before, it's just to get your thoughts out of your head to some external platform. There's also a practice which I got from a Hungarian author and psychologist. It's called self-healing writing. And what you do there is you write down something that bothers you and concerns you. For example, I think that I'm not gonna amount to anything in my life, and that is stressing me out. And then in the next line, you're taking the perspective of someone else, as if you just heard that previous sentence from a friend of yours, and you're responding to it with something like, oh, that's interesting. Why are you afraid of that? Are you nothing now? Have you made it to nothing up until now? And then once again, you're reflecting on it from your own perspective. And you say, well, I did make it to something, but I haven't achieved as much as I wanted. And then you go on like this. And oftentimes, after doing this for 15, 20 minutes, you're a completely different person after that practice. You're able to look at the whole situation with a completely different perspective and state of mind. And then there is, of course, meditation, which a lot of people swear by, and probably rightfully so, but I'm not going to comment on it too much because, quite frankly, I'm not a big meditator myself. Now, if you wake up during the night and you find yourself overanalyzing and thinking about stuff and you cannot get back to sleep because of that, then a really good thing to do is to wake up, get out of bed, and write down your thoughts somewhere. Just get them out of your head, and that can greatly help to calm you down. And maybe when you go back to sleep, you won't be so eager to overthink on all of those things. A related point off of that is that if you go to bed and you cannot get to sleep within about 20 minutes, then a really good practice to get into is to get out of bed and do something else. Because basically what you're doing when you're just lying in bed, tossing, turning, and not sleeping, is that you're weakening that association that your brain has with sleep. You're basically weakening the sleep-inducing effect of your bed. So it's good to get out of bed, not trying to force sleeping if it doesn't happen. Do something else, maybe listen to some music, or again, write down your thoughts, maybe clean the kitchen or something like that, and then go back and try again when you feel a bit more tired. Okay, so for the end, a couple more tips that you can do to optimize your sleep. The first thing is optimize your bedroom for sleeping. So basically you want your bedroom to be as dark as possible. If you can make it so that it's completely pitch black and you cannot even see your hands if you do this, that is the best. It's not that easy to do all the time because maybe you're renting an Airbnb where they don't have blackout curtains and then you have to buy them. I actually bought some of these gluable, sticky curtain things that you can just stick onto the window, and they are portable. They are just sticking by themselves. You don't have to put anything on the window that makes them stick. They just automatically stick up there. I'm looking for the word, but it just doesn't come to me. Those are great. I'm going to link them in the show notes below. So if you want to look into them, those are great. And if it's really hard for you to make your room dark enough, then you might want to use one of these eye cover thingies, which are blocking out the light. So those are great, and I'm using them. Actually, whether or not my room is dark enough, I'm always using them. Of course, noises can also wake you up, and you want to be mindful of those. I've been using earplugs for sleeping for about 7 years now, and I wouldn't even think of going to bed without them. And of course, it's super annoying when you finally fall asleep and then some sudden noise wakes you up. So for that purpose, they are great. If you don't have earplugs for some reason, then putting in some sort of white noise into your ear. You can find a lot of these long, like 10-hour long clips on YouTube. You can just download them on your phone and you can listen to them while you're sleeping, and those can help as well. A note on that is that Listening to some sort of speech or even a podcast or interview can also help during sleeping if someone is speaking with a very soothing, kind of calm tone. There is a video genre on YouTube actually called Unintentional ASMR, which are these recorded clips where someone is giving a lecture, or maybe it's a doctor's checkup or something, and the person, without knowing it, is talking in this super, super calming, soothing tone of voice. And sometimes I'm listening to those when I cannot get to sleep, and you listen to them, you kind of try to interpret what they're saying, and eventually it just makes you drift away and fall asleep. By the way, that's one reason I like Jason Blaha. A lot of people shit on him. He's a controversial figure in the fitness industry, but he's one of these unintentional ASMR guys. Like when he's sitting in front of his camera and he's saying, "Hey guys, it's Jason Blaha and Omar Isuf made a video and it was such bullshit." And I'm like, oh, so nice, I'm falling asleep. There is also a podcast actually called Sleep With Me, which sounds a bit creepy, but it's a guy who is telling you bedtime stories. And what he's doing is that he's telling you a story, but then he starts rambling and go on irrelevant tangents. And it almost mimics the way your thoughts are drifting all over the place when you're about to fall asleep. And he's doing it for long enough that eventually it actually makes you distracted and it makes you fall asleep if your problem is this sleep strain that I mentioned in the beginning, where you're not able to let go of your thoughts and that's what's keeping you awake. A related point on that is, if part of your problem and part of the source of your sleep issues is that you're worried that you cannot get good sleep, which is actually fairly common. I've been dealing with that a lot of times in my life. So let's say the next day you have a meeting or something important for which you have to be fresh and focused, and you're worried that you won't be able to get good sleep and you will be a wreck and useless when that time comes, then a really easy solution is to simply give yourself a sleep buffer time. Give yourself enough time to get good sleep. So if you need 8 hours to feel refreshed, then give yourself 10 hours in bed. And that way, even if you wake up a few times during the night, even if you cannot get to sleep right away, the chances that you will only get 5 hours of sleep instead of 8 will be much lower because you have that extra time buffer. And then finally, the last few things. For one, cooler temperatures are better for sleeping, and that is because higher body temperatures are basically associated with wakefulness in your body. Basically, your body temperature is naturally going through fluctuations over the course of the day, where it hits a peak at some point during the daylight hours, and then it gradually goes down as your sleep time approaches. So if your room is very warm, that might mess with your sleep. So in the winter, that's not a big issue because you can just turn down the heating, which is great because you save some money on your electricity bill. And you can even let some air through your windows, and there is your cool room right there. In the summer, this can be trickier. For example, now it's crazy warm right here, so an AC can help, but of course that can be tough on your electricity bill. A cheaper option is to have a ventilator in your room, which is directed towards you. Recently, I used that when I was visiting home at my family house, and my bedroom there was crazy warm. It was literally like a sauna, and I used one of these ventilator thingies, and it was great, and it made my sleeping very chill, literally, because the temperature was chill. Food intake is something to be smart with around bedtime. It is actually quite individual how well people do with a full stomach before bed. For some people, it is the best thing they can do before bed is to have a big meal and it helps them sleep well. For other people though, it messes with their sleep. What I can tell you is that a higher carb meal tends to help with sleep quality, probably because carb intake influences serotonin in the brain, and that can help you to sleep better. But again, it's not one of those things where the more the better. So I've tried having some super high carb meals close to bedtime, and then I just woke up during the night covered in sweat, and I was just unable to sleep because of that. So play around with that, but in general, about 2 to 4 hours before bedtime, some carb and protein dominant meal tends to treat people pretty well. And then of course the last thing is supplements. Melatonin is something that can help you to fall asleep faster because it literally is the hormone that your body produces as it's getting ready for sleeping. So 1 to 3, maybe 5 milligrams in certain cases can do wonders with your ability to fall asleep quickly. So one thing I like to do is to have a book that I'm reading on my phone with twilights activated, of course, to not be exposed to too much blue light. And I'm popping in a melatonin pill at the same time, and that helps me to drift away soon enough. By the way, forgot to mention, if you wake up early in the morning, like several hours before you would want to, then one thing you can do is take a low dose of melatonin. So maybe something like 1/3 of a milligram, 1/2 of a milligram or something like that, and that can help you to fall back asleep, because this is something that tends to happen with me quite a lot, is that I don't know, if my regular wake time would be 8 a.m., then I'm just waking up at 4 or 5 a.m., completely restless, really tired. I can feel that I'm a wreck and I would just be completely useless if I woke up now, but I'm just not sleepy for some reason. And that is super, super frustrating. So if that happens to you, then try taking a low dose of melatonin. Another supplement that you might want to know of is phenibut, which I'm also using. It's a form of GABA, and what separates it from other GABA supplements is that it is able to cross the blood-brain barrier, and it is able to relax you before sleeping. I will link to an article which Menno Henselmans wrote on this, and he has a calculator in there which helps you to determine the dose of phenibut that you should be using to avoid getting addicted to it, because it is highly addictive if you're using too much of it. And so yeah, definitely use that calculator that he has linked there. But in general, around 1 milligram or slightly under is a pretty safe dose for most people. But again, read that article first. Glycine is another supplement that a lot of people are swearing by. I've tried it. I haven't noticed much benefits from them, but there is some evidence that it can improve sleep quality. And even if you don't get enough good sleep, it might help mitigating the negative effects of sleep deprivation to some extent. And if you want to educate yourself more about supplements, I'm going to link 2 Examine articles that are related to sleep and tips about sleep. Some of those have been covered in this video pretty well, but if you're curious about supplementation around sleep, then that article is really great. So guys, I really hope this video was helpful. If you have sleep issues, if you're not able to get good sleep on a regular basis, I am with you. I know how frustrating that can be, but trust me, if you're doing most of the things that I talked about in this video, which is quite a lot, but if you really distill it down, then it comes down to a couple of major action steps, then you will greatly increase the chances of getting good sleep. Like I said in the beginning, getting good sleep is important and it's gonna help you on your fitness journey, but if you currently have sleeping problems, don't make it worse by stressing over it. Have a bit of a stoic mindset and just know that it's within your control, and with enough smart strategies, you can fix it and you can be one of those people who wakes up every morning completely refreshed. So guys, I hope this was helpful and you enjoyed this. If you did, please drop a like, comment, let me know your thoughts. If you haven't already, then subscribe. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, which of course is gonna take a while. At this point, I'm at around 7,000. But if you can help me get there, then we will have a huge celebration. And I actually have a very special video prepared for that instance, which is actually gonna be hilarious and awesome. So yeah, let's hope we can make that happen together. Once again, thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very cool weekend and see you next time.